The orchestra played a soft waltz as white rose petals danced in the breeze. Guests in designer gowns and tuxedos sipped champagne beneath the canopy of a golden spring afternoon. The Reed estate garden looked like a magazine spread, flawless, luxurious, curated to perfection. Victor Reed stood at the altar, the embodiment of confidence in his tailored suit, his hand lightly brushing the engraved cufflink that bore the initials of his bride-to-be, Sophia Thomas. She was everything the tabloids adored, stunning, polished, the heiress of a cosmetics empire. But just as the officiant cleared his throat to begin, a sound shattered the serenity, a sharp, mechanical thump-thump-thump from above. Heads tilted, skyward in confusion. The music faltered. Guests murmured, shielding their eyes from the glare. A helicopter hovered over the estate. Security tensed. Victor froze. From the descending aircraft stepped a woman in a pristine white suit. Her hair was swept back, her face calm, eerily calm. In each hand, she held a child. Twins, around 6 years old. A boy and a girl. The girl clutched a small plush fox. The boy stared ahead, his eyes locked on Victor with uncanny stillness. Whisper rippled through the crowd as the guests turned toward the groom, comparing features. The same dark hair, the same sharp jawline. But it was the eyes, icy gray, glinting like fractured steel, that silenced the crowd, because no one, not even Victor, could deny it. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them every time he looked in the mirror. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 years earlier, the world had looked very different. Eliza Winters, back then still Eliza Reed, was glowing in a green satin gown at a gala for pediatric cancer research. She moved gracefully from donor to donor, her voice soft but confident, speaking of gene therapies and clinical trials. Victor hovered near the bar, watching her with something between admiration and awe. "She's brilliant," he told his friend Julian, who stood beside him swirling a glass of whiskey. "And we're trying for a baby. I think it's finally time." Julian smiled, but the corners of his eyes didn't crinkle. "Fatherhood, huh? That'll change things. You sure she'll slow down long enough to raise a child?" Victor laughed, brushing off the comment. He didn't notice the flicker in Julian's gaze, the way his jaw tensed as Eliza leaned in to speak to the health minister across the room. The night was perfect. They danced under chandeliers, shared whispered jokes, and toasted to the future. Victor, drunk on love and wine, told Eliza he couldn't imagine his life without her. But sometimes, betrayal begins quietly. It doesn't come with slammed doors or raised voices. Sometimes it walks into your home in expensive shoes, carrying your best friend's smirk and your worst fears disguised as concern. And for Eliza, that betrayal started with a single text message. She had just stepped out of the shower when she saw Victor standing in their bedroom staring at her phone. His hands were trembling. "Eliza," he said, voice tight. "Who is Michael?" She froze. "Michael?" He turned the phone toward her. There it was, a string of messages, flirty, intimate, stamped with her name, messages she had never written. 3 months, Eliza. That's how long you've been sneaking around with him, our bed, our home. Victor's voice cracked, and Eliza stepped forward. "I don't know what this is, Victor." "I didn't—" Julian appeared in the doorway, holding something in his hand. "I found this in the study," he said. "A hotel keycard, a receipt, a time-stamped photo." Eliza's stomach dropped. It was a setup, but Victor didn't see it. He only saw evidence, crafted, timed, polished like a blade, and he let it slice clean through everything they'd built. That night, Eliza stood in the driveway barefoot, rain soaking her silk robe as Victor tossed her suitcase into the trunk of her car. From the balcony, Julian watched with dry eyes. "Eliza Reed," the security guard said, "your building access is revoked. Your accounts will be frozen by morning." And then he turned away. No one saw the woman break. No one saw the pain take root. No one knew she was already carrying 2 lives inside her and had nowhere left to go. The first night was the worst. Eliza parked her car behind a 24-hour pharmacy, curled up in the driver's seat with her knees pulled to her chest. Her designer robe clung damp to her skin, and the only warmth came from the breath fogging up the window. She hadn't eaten in over a day, and her hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the shock that hadn't yet settled into numbness. Inside, her purse. She found a crumpled $20 bill and the pregnancy test she had bought with it. She didn't even wait to get out of the car. The faint blue lines appeared before she'd finished counting to 10. Positive. She stared at the result, her whole body frozen. It wasn't just her life Victor had thrown away. It was theirs. And now, it was hers alone. That night, she didn't cry. There would be time for that later. The next morning, she tried to get into the office building to speak to Victor. The guards, once polite and welcoming, now crossed their arms and blocked her path. "He said you're not allowed up," one muttered, looking away. "Said you're compromised." "I'm pregnant," she said, voice low. "Please tell him they're his." The guard shifted awkwardly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He doesn't believe they are." Across the marble lobby, Julian stood with a coffee in hand, watching her. He didn't smile. He didn't sneer. He simply nodded once and walked away, and that's when Eliza understood. Victor had made his decision, and Julian had won. She found shelter a few nights later thanks to Eleanor Simmons, a retired nurse who noticed her huddled on a bench outside a clinic, holding her stomach. "You're either pregnant, lost, or both," Eleanor had said, blunt as ever. "Either way, you're coming with me." Eleanor's house was small and cluttered with old books, potted plants, and photos of a daughter who had died young. She gave Eliza soup, clean clothes, and a bed in the guest room that still smelled faintly of lavender and grief. In exchange, Eliza gave her silence. Weeks passed. She pawned her engagement ring for money. She registered under her maiden name at the free clinic. And quietly, she began building a life no one expected her to survive. Until one day, in a crowded coffee shop, she overheard 2 men in suits talking about Reed Pharmaceuticals. "Side effects were hidden," one said, sipping his espresso. "I told Julian it was going to blow up in his face." Eliza turned around slowly, and in that moment, she felt the spark. Not rage, not sorrow, but purpose. She had lost everything, except her mind, and she would use it to take everything back. Eliza knew she needed allies, real ones, not corporate vultures in suits or family friends who had vanished. When things got uncomfortable, she needed someone who valued truth over reputation. That's how she found Dr. Ana Torres. The clinic was small, tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat, but it buzzed with urgency and compassion. Dr. Torres moved like a whirlwind, her white coat flapping behind her, barking orders while somehow managing a kind word for every patient. Eliza had come for a checkup. What she left with was a new direction. "You're carrying twins," Dr. Torres said, scanning the ultrasound with a raised brow. "Classic twin TN presentation. Lucky you." Eliza stared at the screen, her breath catching. 2 heartbeats, 2 tiny lives, pulsing steadily in the middle of chaos. Dr. Torres looked at her over the monitor. "No partner listed. That by choice?" Eliza hesitated. "He doesn't know. He thinks I betrayed him." Torres didn't blink. "Then he's a fool." And just like that, something shifted. Eliza told her everything about Victor, the lies, the betrayal, the research she'd once led that mysteriously vanished when she was pushed out of the company. And when she finished, Dr. Torres leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "I've got a storage unit turned lab and enough funding to cover 6 more months of research. But I need brains, guts, people who've been burned and still want to fight. You in?" Eliza's answer was immediate. Yes. Weeks blurred into months. She moved into the spare room at Eleanor's permanently and began working with Dr. Torres. During the day, they reviewed old data, double-checked clinical trials, and quietly began redeveloping a compound Eliza had once believed could change the world, until Julian buried it to protect his own failing pipeline. While Luna and Leo grew, inside her so did Phoenix, the codename for the drug. And for the dream she was starting to reclaim. She never reached out to Victor again, but every so often she would check news headlines. And one morning, 6 months in, there it was. Reed Pharmaceuticals announces groundbreaking cancer treatment. Topper E., name of the lead researcher, Julian Cross. Eliza felt her stomach tighten, not from the pregnancy this time, but from fury. He was using her research. Her name had been wiped from the patent, and that finally broke something open inside her. She wasn't just going to survive anymore. She was going to rise, and this time, she would not be erased. By the time the twins were born, Eliza had already shed the last remnants of the woman Victor had thrown out in the rain. The labor was long, unmedicated by choice. She wanted to feel every second of it. Pain was no longer her enemy. It was her rite of passage. Eleanor held her hand, whispering affirmations through clenched teeth and contractions. Luna came first. Then Leo, a minute later, his tiny fist curled as if ready to fight the world. As the nurse placed them in her arms, Eliza didn't cry. She smiled, quietly, fiercely. "These two," she whispered, "are mine. No last name. No legacy to inherit but the one she would build." In the months that followed, her world became both smaller and more focused. Feedings, sleepless nights, late-night spreadsheet marathons beside a crib. Dr. Torres helped convert a section of the clinic into a makeshift lab, and little by little, Eliza resurrected Phoenix, refined it, tested it, documented everything. She registered a new business under her maiden name, Eliza Winters. No one in the industry connected her to Reed Pharmaceuticals. Not yet. Phoenix Pharmaceuticals was born on paper the same week her twins turned 6 months old. She secured a small grant from a Women in STEM initiative, used Eleanor's connections to meet with low-income community clinics willing to participate in ethical trials. And when the initial results came back, with efficacy rates higher than Julian's stolen compound and almost no side effects, Eliza knew she was standing at the edge of something powerful. She didn't need Victor's name. She had her own, and it was starting to echo in rooms he didn't even know existed. Then one morning, as Luna played with her sock monkey and Leo gnawed on the corner of an old research folder, Eliza opened her email and found something unexpected. A licensing request. From Mercy General Hospital, they wanted Phoenix. Her formula, her company, they were willing to pay 7 figures. Eliza didn't blink. She replied with a counteroffer. Doubled it. They accepted within the hour. That night, as the twins slept curled up on either side of her, Eliza stared at the ceiling, heart-pounding. She was no longer the woman discarded by a powerful man. She was the woman he would soon be begging to meet. And when he finally learned the truth, she would be the one deciding whether he deserved it. 6 weeks after the Mercy deal, Eliza stood on the rooftop of Phoenix Pharmaceuticals' new headquarters, a modest but sleek building carved out of an old library downtown. The skyline stretched. Before her, and just beyond the horizon, she could see the glow of Reed Tower. She sipped her coffee slowly, watching the sunrise like it owed her something. Phoenix had grown faster than she anticipated. The media dubbed her the Ghost Founder. No one knew where she came from, only that her research was flawless, her formulas revolutionary, and her company unshakably ethical. She kept her face out of interviews, always audio, always anonymous. But one day, a journalist had speculated, Eliza Winters must be someone with a grudge. You don't build something this brilliant without fire behind it. They weren't wrong. That same week, the trade magazine landed on her desk. Victor Reed, smiling stiffly on the cover. The headline? Power couple to marry. Victor Reed and Sophia Thomas announce spring wedding. Eliza didn't flinch, but her fingers curled around the edge of the page. Sophia. The woman who had replaced her like a spare part, who wore her dresses, who now stood beside the man who once told Eliza she was everything he'd ever want. The wedding date? May 15th. The exact day, 6 years ago, Victor had thrown her out into the storm. She laughed, not a bitter laugh. Not anymore. That night, as she tucked Luna into bed and kissed Leo's forehead, she whispered, "You were my storm. Now you're my sunshine." Later, she sat alone in her office, eyes scanning a report from a private investigator she'd quietly hired months earlier. Transactions, signatures, fake accounts. Sophia and Julian had embezzled over $80 million from Reed Pharmaceuticals. But that wasn't the story Eliza wanted to tell. Not yet. What she wanted was simple. Truth. Not revenge. She leaned back in her chair and looked toward the skyline. Again, let them have their wedding. Let Victor smile for the cameras. Because when the truth came crashing down, it would be Eliza's story the world would remember, and she had every intention of telling it, on her terms, on her timeline. And that timeline was about to run out. 3 weeks before the wedding, a courier delivered a discreet black envelope to the front desk of Reed Pharmaceuticals. Inside was a single photograph, printed on thick matte paper. It was of 2 children, Leo and Luna, playing in a park. Their eyes unmistakable. Victor's eyes. On the back, a handwritten message. Truth. Arrives on May 15th. Ready your vows. No name. No return address. Victor stared at the photo for a long time in his office, every fiber in his body screaming denial. But something about the girl's tilted smile and the boy's furrowed brows gnawed at him. He shoved it into a drawer and told no one. That same night, Eliza stood before a glass wall in her office, watching her reflection split against the city lights. Her phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. They've finalized the guest list. 300 confirmed. Private garden estate. Helicopter landing zone, too, probably for drama. Eliza chuckled. Perfect. Let's give them a show. Eleanor hesitated. Are you sure you want to do this? You've already won. Eliza's voice was calm, almost tender. This isn't about winning. It's about telling the story right. No one ever asked what happened to the woman who got kicked out in the rain. I think it's time they found out. Back at Reed Tower, Julian was in a panic. The numbers didn't lie. Phoenix had quietly swept up 3 more major hospital accounts. He walked into Victor's office, dropped a report on his desk. Who the hell is this woman? Eliza Winters? Julian's voice was tight. Victor didn't answer right away. His thoughts were elsewhere. He finally said, She's brilliant. Whoever she is. Julian stiffened. You're not actually... Victor cut him off. No, I'm not doing anything. We have a wedding to focus on. Julian tried to smile, but his palms were sweating. He knew the storm was coming. He just didn't know when. Across town, Eliza zipped up a white power suit, sleek, elegant, clean like the first page of a new chapter. She looked in the mirror and whispered to herself, 6 years, 2 children, 1 truth. She walked into the nursery where Leo and Luna were coloring. Are you both ready? Leo looked up, puzzled. For what, Mommy? Eliza smiled. To meet your father. Luna tilted her head. The one from the pictures? Yes, sweetheart. The one with the sad eyes. Luna nodded. Okay. But will he be mad? Eliza kneeled down and hugged her tight. No, baby, he won't be mad. He'll be quiet, and then he'll understand. The next morning, a single text went out from Eliza's encrypted phone to her team. Initiate Phase 5. Delivery window confirmed. ETA, 3:15 p.m., May 15th. She stood on the rooftop again, the wind catching her hair. Beside her, Eleanor handed over a final envelope. Inside, DNA results, financial documents, and a signed statement from Dr. Torres about the altered trial data. It wasn't a weapon, it was truth. And in 6 days, it would land like a thunderclap, right in the middle of Sophia's white-laced wedding. The afternoon sun cast golden rays across the sprawling estate gardens of the Reed family. Every hedge was trimmed to perfection. Rows of white chairs lined the manicured lawn, and a sea of white roses blanketed the arch where Victor and Sophia were to exchange their vows. A string quartet played softly in the background as guests murmured, champagne glasses clinking, unaware that the storybook image they were witnessing was about to crack wide open. Victor adjusted his cufflinks at the altar, his eyes scanning the crowd but never really focusing. Beside him, Julian whispered, "You good?" Victor gave a faint nod, but something in him felt off. An ache in the back of his mind he couldn't shake, as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff and didn't know why. Sophia approached in a fitted gown of ivory silk, her veil pinned with heirloom pearls. She looked radiant, confident, as if this moment had always belonged to her, and in her mind, it had. Just as the officiant cleared his throat, ready to begin, a sound split the air. Thwump, thwump, thwump. Everyone turned their eyes upward as a black helicopter appeared above the coup. Treetops, its rotors slicing through the delicate melody of the string quartet. Gasps erupted from the guests as the aircraft descended toward the estate's private helipad, an extravagance Sophia had insisted on for flair. Victor's face drained of color. Julian stiffened. Sophia's lips parted. What the hell? The blade slowed, the door opened, and out stepped Eliza, clad in a crisp white suit, her heels sharp against the stone. She held the hand of 2 children, one on each side. Leo and Luna walked with confidence, dressed simply but elegantly, their expressions unreadable. The crowd was frozen. Cameras clicked. Victor blinked as if seeing a ghost. And then he saw their eyes. Leo's piercing gaze, Luna's tilted smile, reflections of his own face from decades past. A ripple of whispers passed through the guests like a wave crashing against glass. Eliza stepped forward, voice calm, steady. "Forgive the interruption," she said, eyes locking with Victor's. "But I couldn't let you marry someone else without meeting your children first." The air vanished from the garden. Victor took a step back. "Children?" Julian moved forward, trying to interject. "This is insane. She's—" But Eliza held up a single manila folder and handed it to the officiant. Inside are the DNA results confirming paternity. Also included are affidavits, timestamps, and security footage showing the series of manipulations that led to my removal from your life, Victor. All orchestrated by Julian, and, unfortunately, Sophia. Sophia turned. "That's a lie." Eliza didn't blink. "You altered clinical trial data, then used your leverage with Julian to isolate Victor, while I was pregnant with twins. More gasps. Julian lunged toward Eliza, but Victor grabbed his arm, hard. "Is it true?" Victor's voice cracked. Julian didn't answer. His silence screamed louder than any denial ever could. From the back of the garden, 2 men in suits began making their way forward, badges flashing discreetly. "Julian Moore," one of them said. "We're with the FBI. We'd like to speak." With you about 82 million in misappropriated funds and your role in the suppression of trial data submitted to the FDA, Sophia took a step back, trembling. You said, Julian, you said no one would find out. The agents escorted Julian away, his face pale, fists clenched. Victor looked down at the twins now standing in front of him. His knees buckled slightly, and he crouched. He couldn't speak. Luna tilted her head. Are you okay? Victor nodded, barely able to breathe. You look like your mom. Leo stepped slightly behind Eliza. Mom said we could meet you if we were ready. Victor looked up at Eliza. How? Why now? Eliza met his gaze, her voice steady. Because you deserve to know the truth. And so do they. The officiant stood frozen, the ceremony clearly over. Guests began to murmur, unsure whether to stay or leave. But Victor remained kneeling, eyes wide, heart wide open, in front of the family he never knew he had, and the woman who had survived the storm he once helped create. Victor stood frozen as the crowd slowly dissipated, the hum of whispered disbelief fading beneath the sound of his own heartbeat. His hands trembled as he looked at the two children in front of him. His children. Not just names or ideas, but living, breathing proof of a past he had buried beneath anger and lies. Eliza gently placed her hand on Leo's shoulder. He looked up at her and nodded, then turned back to Victor. Can we go now, Mom? Victor rose slowly. Wait, please. Can I talk to them? To you? Eliza hesitated, then gave a single nod. 5 minutes. Sophia was gone. At some point, she'd slipped away unnoticed. The white roses that had once framed a picture-perfect ceremony now looked like a funeral for something that had never been real. Victor guided them to a small bench under the oak tree, the same tree where he and Eliza had taken engagement photos, all those years ago. I don't expect you to forgive me, he began, his voice low, raw. What I did, pushing you away, believing lies without asking for the truth. It's the worst mistake I've ever made. Eliza didn't say anything. She simply watched him, her arms loosely wrapped around Luna, who had nestled into her side. Victor continued. I don't deserve your trust, and I know that. But if there's a chance, even the smallest chance that I could know them, be there, for them in some way, I'd take it, every day. Leo stared at him for a long moment. Do you like dinosaurs? Victor blinked. Yes. I used to be obsessed with them when I was your age. Leo's brow furrowed like he was considering an important test. What's your favorite one? Victor smiled faintly. Ankylosaurus. Built like a tank, with that big tail club. Always underestimated. Leo's eyes lit up. Luna whispered to Eliza, Can he come visit our house? Eliza didn't answer right away, but her gaze softened. Later that evening, as twilight settled, Victor found himself standing in Eliza's penthouse, the twins showing him their drawings and handmade books, proudly pointing out the artwork lining the walls. There, on a shelf, sat a small wooden box labeled Dad. Inside were carefully saved things, photos from magazines, old business cards, even a printed-out screenshot of his company website from years ago. Eliza noticed him lingering there. I didn't tell them because I wanted revenge, she said, quietly. I told them because they asked, and because they deserved the truth. Victor nodded. They're incredible. They're loved. That's what matters most. A pause stretched between them. I'm not asking for us, he added, his voice barely above a whisper. I know that door is closed, but thank you for giving me a chance to step into their lives. You'll have to earn it, she replied, not unkindly. This isn't a storybook ending, but it can be a beginning. For them. As he turned to go, Leo ran up behind him and pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. It's our family picture, he said. You're in it now. Victor blinked back tears. Thank you. As the elevator doors closed behind him, he looked down at the drawing, 4 stick figures holding hands, standing under a rainbow. The caption read, Mom, Dad, Luna, Leo. It wasn't the ending he had once imagined, but maybe, just maybe, it was a better one. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud. It's living your life with dignity, building something powerful, and letting the truth speak for itself. What do you think? Did Eliza do the right thing? Comment 2 if you think she was too soft. Comment 7 if you believe she handled it perfectly, and don't forget, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Wisdom for more true tales that hit home. Tomorrow's story might just change how you see betrayal, forever.